Emergency services, what's your location?
We're in the reserve. He's being chased. It's the lion. His lion.
Is anyone injured?
Yes. Oh, God, he's down. There's so much blood.
He thought the bond they shared was stronger than instinct, but in a flash of muscle and roar, James Backhem's final safari ended in unspeakable violence. The predator he raised like a son became his executioner, proving nature keeps no loyalties. Subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments because this story asks the question we all fear: can love ever truly tame the wild? James Backhem was no ordinary safari guide. At 52, he had become something of a legend in South Africa's wildlife tourism scene, a man who claimed not to control lions, but to connect with them. His private reserve, known as Eden Ridge, drew celebrities, influencers, and curious travelers who wanted something more than a traditional safari. They came for one thing: Shumba, a massive, golden-maned lion who, according to James, was more companion than creature. Footage showed James walking beside him, hand brushing through his mane like a father with a son. In interviews, he often said, "He's family. He wouldn't hurt me." It wasn't just branding, it was belief. James built his career on ethical safaris, rejecting tranquilizers, leashes, and cages. He insisted that trust, not fear, created true safety. Fences, he once told a National Geographic crew, are for people who don't understand the animal. With his khaki shirt unbuttoned, sun-darkened skin, and silver-streaked beard, he fit the image of a wilderness, sage-weathered, wise, and seemingly in control. His followers adored him. On social media, he was dubbed the Lion Whisperer of Limpopo, but not everyone was convinced. Biologists criticized his practices as dangerous. Former employees described his methods as reckless. Still, James pressed on. His bond with Shumba was central to his identity, his brand, and his story. In September 2022, he announced his final tour, Farewell to the Wild. The event was marketed as intimate and unfiltered, a 6-person walking safari where guests would experience apex predators without barriers. James promised this would be his last before stepping back into a consulting role. "It's time," he wrote in a farewell blog post. "Just me, the land, and the lion who started it all." What no one knew was that the lion had already begun to change, and the wild does not honor goodbyes. Shumba's story began in tragedy. At just 2 weeks old, he was seized from an illegal wildlife trafficker near the Botswana border, malnourished, dehydrated, and barely alive. James Backhem took him in, vowing to raise him with dignity and love. For months, James bottle-fed the cub every 4 hours, sleeping on the floor beside him, even mimicking lion vocalizations to soothe him. The bond forged in those early days became the foundation of James's philosophy, that love, not fear, could raise a predator. Shumba grew quickly, his body thick with muscle by the time he was 3. Though James attempted to integrate him into a semi-wild pride on the reserve, Shumba never fully detached. He'd vanish into the bush for hours, only to return at dusk and nuzzle James like an oversized house cat. Online videos captured their closeness, Shumba licking James's face, trailing him through grasslands, even letting him nap in the shade of his enormous body. These clips went viral, fueling James's fame. But the camera never caught what happened off script. Staff noted that as Shumba matured, he began testing boundaries. He would swat aggressively during play, growl when approached during feeding, and once bit through a handler's boot. On multiple occasions, he ignored recall commands, circling behind James instead of approaching. The behavior wasn't malicious, it was natural, but James refused to see it that way. "He's just asserting himself," he told a local reporter. "I raised him. He knows who I am." Experts weren't convinced. Dr. Helena Vos, a wildlife biologist from Pretoria, warned publicly, "Imprinted lions may lack fear of humans, but they do not lose their predatory instincts. That combination is lethal." Her caution was dismissed. James called such claims fear-mongering. He argued Shumba was the future of coexistence, proof that predators could be partners. Yet behind the scenes, things were shifting. Footage from 2021, never posted publicly, showed Shumba lunging during a play session, knocking James down and tearing the sleeve of his shirt. James laughed it off. But laughter cannot hold back instinct. By mid-2022, the cracks in James Backhem's carefully curated world began to show. Shumba, now a full-grown alpha male with a mane like fire and shoulders as wide as a man's torso, was no longer the cuddly cub who once slept beside James's boots. Staff reported a growing tension in his presence, especially when strangers were nearby. He would pace aggressively when cameras were brought out, his eyes narrowing, tail flicking, ears pulled back. A former guide, who'd worked 3 seasons at Eden Ridge, recalled, "He started growling when James got too close. It wasn't playful anymore. It was a warning." One handler resigned after a terrifying encounter where Shumba Mock charged a group during a dry season walk. The handler submitted a letter detailing safety concerns and recommended a pause in public exposure. James never replied. Instead, he replaced the staff member quietly and posted new promotional footage a week later. Behind the scenes, provincial wildlife officials had grown uneasy. South Africa's Department of Environmental Affairs sent a notice reminding James of proximity regulations regarding apex predators rules he was already known to blur. His license to operate was never revoked, but records show he was under heightened review. Fellow conservationists voiced frustration more openly. A prominent ecotourism operator in KwaZulu-Natal told reporters, "Backhem is the worst kind of idealist. He's built a fantasy around Shumba, and the public is buying it. But he's playing with a loaded gun." Rather than reflect, James became defiant. In podcasts and interviews, he framed his critics as cowards trapped in outdated paradigms. "They don't get it," he said. "They're afraid of what they can't control, and I'm proving you don't have to control something to live alongside it." His final safari was announced weeks later. A private 6-guest, on-foot experience with Shumba, roaming freely as he was meant to. The press release called it a culmination of trust. No cages, no sedatives, just a man and the lion he loved. What none of the guests knew, what James refused to see, was that Shumba had already begun reclaiming the instincts no man could suppress. The sun had barely crested the horizon on October 14, 2022, when James Backhem stepped out in front of his final Safari Group 6 VIP guests from around the world, each handpicked and promised a once-in-a-lifetime, fence-free encounter with the king of predators. They were outfitted with neutral-toned clothes, light packs, and GoPro chest rigs. James led the group himself, as he had done hundreds of times before, but this walk felt different. He carried only a carved wooden stick, no tranquilizers, no firearms. "You don't need force when there's trust," he had once told a reporter. Earlier that morning, Shumba had been released into the wild portion of the reserve alone. His GPS tracking collar had been removed 2 weeks prior. James believed the bond was strong enough that Shumba would find him, as he always had, but there was no protocol if he didn't. As they hiked through dry bushveld and acacia-dotted clearings, guests remarked that James seemed unusually quiet. One visitor, a wildlife photographer from Germany, later recalled, "He kept scanning the horizon, not in awe, almost searching. Birds scattered overhead. Dust kicked up from the group's boots. Then, as they approached a bend near a sun-bleached termite mound, someone pointed, a flash of tawny fur, a ripple of movement in the tall grass. Cameras rose. James stopped cold. His posture changed. There was no excitement in his voice, just a terse, low whisper. "Stay behind me." No one realized how close the edge had come. Not yet, but the bush had gone silent, and something was watching. The stillness shattered in an instant. Shumba burst from the underbrush like a cannonball of muscle and fury, his massive frame low to the ground, tail lashing behind him, golden eyes locked onto a single target, James. For a split second, the illusion held. James stepped forward, his voice soft, almost pleading, slipping into the baby talk tone he had used since Shumba was a cub. "Hey boy, it's me, buddy." He dropped his walking stick, raised his arms. No fear, only belief. Shumba didn't slow. He launched forward with terrifying speed. The impact threw James backward, his body crumpling under the weight. A guttural sound rang out, part growl, part scream, and then silence fell again, broken only by the thud of paws and the wet sound of flesh being torn. The lion's jaws locked onto James's neck and shoulder. Blood sprayed across the dust. One guest bolted, screaming for help. Another collapsed to the ground in shock. The rest stood frozen, disbelief etched across their faces as the scene unfolded before them like a nightmare they couldn't wake from. There was no struggle, no chance. James never got back up. Within less than 2 minutes, it was over. Shumba stood over what remained of the man who raised him, chest heaving, mouth stained red. When rangers finally arrived, weapons drawn, they found James's body broken and bloodied, his face almost unrecognizable. The lion didn't run. He didn't hide. He simply stared back, unflinching, as if nothing unnatural had happened at all. Nature had reclaimed its own. Shumba was still standing over James's body when the rangers approached. He didn't growl, didn't retreat, simply stared, calm and alert, as if waiting. That was enough. A lion that no longer feared humans was a lion that could never be trusted again. The rangers made the call. A single shot ended Shumba's life where he stood, his massive body collapsing beside the man who raised him. Within hours, the news exploded across the globe. Headlines blurred with disbelief. Lion kills handler on farewell tour. Animal rights groups mourned the loss of Shumba, calling his death a tragedy born from human arrogance. Safety advocates countered, demanding tighter regulations for predator tourism. Online forums lit up with debate. Some fans clung to romanticism. He died doing what he loved. Others were harsher. This wasn't love. It was negligence in disguise. Investigators recovered footage from the guests' cameras and body-mounted rigs. What they found was chilling. In one unedited clip, James is seen standing rigid as Shumba approaches. His hands tremble. He hesitates. Another video went viral within hours. A guest's voice, shaking with fear, screams, "He's coming! James, do something!" Seconds later, the screen jerks violently as the camera is knocked away. Public perception began to shift. The memorial service was somber, attended by friends, former staff, and a few tearful supporters. Flowers were laid at the reserve's entrance. A carved stone was placed under James's favorite tree. The reserve itself was shuttered indefinitely, its website taken offline, its trails overgrown within weeks. A ranger who had worked alongside James for 5 years gave a quiet interview. He said, "It wasn't just a man being killed by a lion. It was like watching a father torn apart by his own son. A bond broken not by hatred but by instinct." In the weeks following James Backhem's death, experts from around the world began weighing in it with shock, but with grim recognition. Leading ethologists, wildlife behaviorists, and big cat specialists all echoed a single warning. This was not a freak accident. It was a predictable tragedy. "Imprinting is not domestication," said Dr. Leanne Calder, a behavioral ecologist from Oxford. "Just because an animal bonds emotionally with a human doesn't mean its instincts have disappeared. It simply means those instincts are now aimed closer to home." James had treated Shumba like family, but lions are not built for family. They are apex predators, wired for dominance, territoriality, and explosive violence. Several specialists pointed to James's final moment's decision to raise his arms and speak gently as a possible trigger. That submissive posture, when combined with direct eye contact, can spark a chase reflex in large cats. "It's the worst combination," said Dr. Anton Murray, a South African carnivore specialist. "You've got a lion with no fear of humans and no social cues to prevent escalation. That's not a bond. That's a ticking clock." Others noted that Shumba's behavior likely shifted during mating season, a time when male lions become more volatile and prone to unpredictable aggression. Stress, environmental, hormonal, or social, can reignite latent instincts in even the most well-raised predator. Emotional imprinting, where a wild animal forms a deep attachment to a human caregiver, can be profoundly misleading. It creates a dangerous illusion of safety, a fantasy where the line between wild and tame dissolves. But as one expert put it, biology doesn't care about sentiment. Wildlife organizations quickly turned the case into a cautionary tale. Training seminars around the globe began incorporating footage from the safari. PowerPoint slides showed stills of James and Shumba first in harmony, then in tragedy. The narrative was clear. No matter how close the connection, no matter how many years of peace, a predator is never a pet. And a moment of misplaced trust can cost everything. James Backhem's death did not happen in a vacuum. It joins a haunting lineage of tragic stories that all follow the same arc: a deep emotional bond with a wild animal, warnings dismissed, boundaries ignored, and in the end, blood spilled. Years earlier, Marius Els, a South African farmer, died after being mauled by his beloved pet hippopotamus. Els had raised the animal since infancy, called it his son, and allowed it to roam freely on his property. "Humphrey's like a human," he once said. Months later, Humphrey crushed him to death by the river. In Alaska, Timothy Treadwell spent 13 summers living among grizzly bears, filming his interactions and claiming a spiritual connection with them. "I love them with all my heart," he said. But in 2003, Treadwell and his girlfriend were killed and eaten by the very animals he sought to protect. Audio of the attack was later recovered too graphic to release publicly. And then there was Charla Nash, whose face was destroyed by a chimpanzee named Travisa, 200-pound primate raised as a pet, dressed in clothes, and driven around town like a child. Travis had appeared in commercials, he knew how to use a TV remote, and one day, he tore a woman's face off. These stories, different species, same tragedy share, the same structure. A person believes their love is the exception. That affection can rewrite instinct. That years of peace are proof of control. And every time, nature reminds us, it does not ask for permission. Social media plays a cruel role in these myths. Images of humans cuddling lions or laughing with wolves gain millions of likes, romanticizing what is, in reality, an unnatural and dangerous relationship. Experts warn this culture breeds ignorance. "Wild isn't broken," said Dr. Helena Voss. "We just stop respecting it. The problem isn't the animal, it's the illusion." James Backhem's story will now be told alongside these others. Not as a lesson in cruelty, but as a warning about the cost of forgetting what the wild really is.